Hello, welcome to our second episode of Death is Life. I am Dr. Beth Eames, and today we're going to be talking about mashups in medical education, which has a lot to do for me with psychological safety, the hidden curriculum, and some more well-being today than pathology. So I'd like to start with one of my favorite quotes by one of my favorite authors, and it's "Who We Are is How We Lead" by Brene Brown. She is a researcher on vulnerability and shame and human emotions. And for me, this translates into kind of a complex definition. We're all complex people, so we all bring pieces of ourselves to how we educate and how we teach and mentor. And so for me, I'm very atypical in the pathology realm. A lot of pathologists are very left brain, very analytical, scientists, researchers, very practical. That's definitely me, but I also have a very active, sometimes unfortunately active right brain, which is creativity and free spirit and, trying different things out, curiosity, painting, music, poetry. And so for me, what this looks like in my daily life is I'm not just a pathologist, I'm also a DJ. What I do in my spare time is I make mashups, which are basically pieces of music made by blending two or more other pieces of music into a new piece. So I'll take, the instrumentals from one song and I'll mix it with the vocals from another song, and it's a new song. I myself am also a mashup. I consider myself a blend of many other works and mentors. These are some mentors I've had that are very near and dear to my heart. And I would like to point out that not all of these people are pathologists. At least one of them is a social worker. So that has been a really important part of my personality and my mentorship mashup. Is that I contain all these pieces, all the good pieces I've taken from all the great mentors I've had. But then I'm a new piece, I'm creating my own style and kind of forging my own way. But my mentorship style has been very much shaped by the style that I was mentored in. So my work, I mentioned a little bit in our last episode, I do kind of the triple threat thing where I do a lot of teaching of both vet students and residents. I work a lot on diagnostic service, so diagnosing disease in animals submitted to the state diagnostic lab. And then I also participate quite a bit in collaborative research or helping researchers with their science and pathology. But really, when you look at this Venn diagram, central to all of these for me is education. So education is something I'm really passionate about. It touches all of these areas of my work, whether I'm directly teaching veterinary students who are there to be educated, or I'm working with an owner to educate them about, health, or I'm educating a researcher. We're talking about, what model should I choose if I'm trying to model this disease in an animal? What is my pathology telling me about, my drug that I gave this animal? So I'm also educating them, teaching them pathology as well. So education and educational philosophy is really central to a lot of what I do and really important and of interest to me. So I'm actually going to make a couple mashups for you guys today, but it's going to be more philosophical than musical. The first mashup I'd like to start with is what my dog trainer and my dog taught me about educating vet students. And I know there's probably a lot of vet students listening to this, so don't be offended. I am not calling you guys dogs by any means, but there is a lot of overlap in teaching and training, whether that be, with an animal, a child, a furry or a human child, a student, even a PhD student, a graduate student. So this is my little guy, Ouija. Some of you may have met him around the school or around the lab. He's now about 8 years old, but this is him as a puppy. And the first trainer we found had kind of an interesting approach. He was very much of the idea that you are the alpha, you are the controlling partner in this relationship, and your dog needs to learn that they need to do what you want them to do, or else, basically. So this trainer would have us do things like attach the puppy to a 10-foot long leash and then just start walking around, and the puppy has to follow you. And if the puppy doesn't follow you of his own will, you just keep walking and you drag the puppy. This then progressed to, you then can break out in a run and your puppy is supposed to follow you. And if he doesn't, he then gets yanked into following you. So this style of training didn't work for me. It didn't work for my teeny tiny little sensitive Boston boy. So I started looking around for some other methods and other approaches. And I found this book pretty randomly, I think through Amazon or Facebook or something. And I picked it up, and it really changed a lot how I thought, not only about dog training, but eventually how I thought about teaching. And kind of the central thesis of this book is that your relationship with your dog is about a relationship with a partnership. It's a partnership between you and your dog. And you can actually shape their personality through fun and games. It doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to be dragging them around. If you focus on the relationship primarily with your dog, they're going to want to work for you. They're going to want to make you happy and do what you want them to do. But it's because of the relationship. So a little bit more about the theory of this book. It talks about choices as different tunnels. So it uses this metaphor of different tunnels of choice that a dog or really any learner has. So basically, a puppy's world is many, many tunnels. There are many choices that they could make. The puppy is going to be drawn to the tunnels that are brightly lit, that are exciting, that are fun. So they're going to use the tunnels that are desirable to them, right? What happens over time as a dog or a person or anyone repeatedly makes choices, those tunnels that they choose over and over become bigger and wider and more brightly lit and easier to take. So choice is reinforcing. It's been estimated that humans make somewhere in the area of 30 to 40,000 conscious choices per day. And that's not even thinking about our unconscious choices. So choices are constantly being made. You're overwhelmed with all these different tunnels. Some tunnels are easy and fun. Some tunnels are less fun. What we can do as mentors and as teachers and trainers is we can modify those tunnels. We can look at all the choices that our learner is presented with and say, all right, I really need them to take this tunnel, the be good tunnel, or the poop outside tunnel, which is the one that's always a struggle in our house. I want you to make that choice. So I need to make that choice fun and exciting. We need to make pooping outside the most fantastic, fun, wonderful, happy party of an event that's ever happened. And then that tunnel of I make the choice to go to the bathroom outside is going to get bigger. And every time it gets bigger, it gets easier for you to take. So we can definitely reinforce choices. But I think the first step in that is recognizing that there is a choice. A dog has a choice. A human, how much more choice does a human learner have? So I think when we, use this original dog training approach of I'm in charge, I'm the alpha as the teacher in the room, and my learners just need to follow along with me because they're here to learn and they need to just do it. So environments like that where we have things like mandatory attendance, I'm forcing you to show up, and I'm not looking at my part in creating that tunnel of choice. I'm not worried about making the environment safe or fun. I just need you to show up and you need to listen to me. We really risk harming that relationship with the learner, and we risk really losing not only their engagement, but also their trust. So recognizing that our learner has a choice really builds a lot of confidence in the learner. It improves their well-being. It reduces their stress. We're going to build creativity and engagement because we're modifying their tunnels. We're making learning easier for them. We're shaping their choice, but we're recognizing that they have a choice. We're saying, hey, I know that class isn't fun. I recognize that you don't have to come to my class. So I'm going to do everything I can to make my class really engaging and a really good environment for your learning so that you want to come. Because if you want to be there, your learning is going to be that much better because you're invested in it and you're engaged. So when we apply these concepts to the medical classroom, the veterinary classroom, we really have a choice as educators. We can choose our learner by shaping that environment and really shaping the choices that they have to make and making the choice of learning a fun one. So when we think of these different tunnels of choices, we do have a little bit of a problem in pathology. Pathology is not inherently interesting or fun to a lot of people. For me, the pathology tunnel is basically the tunnel of love. I love it. I would much rather choose the tunnel of whale guts, but I realize that is potentially not the popular choice. So as a educator in pathology, I have to do kind of a little bit of extra work to make this tunnel of whale guts seem like the more inviting choice so that students will choose to enter this tunnel with me. So many of you who have had me in class, you're going to recognize a lot of these, but basically as educators, we want to decorate our tunnel. We want to encourage the learner to engage with us, recognizing that they have that choice. They do not owe us their engagement, their attention, anything. That's something that we need to decorate that tunnel and make that the exciting choice. So bring your passion, get excited. The students are gonna pick up on that. I like to use a lot of humor. That's something that works for me. I know that doesn't work for everyone, but I find it's a really helpful memory device. So I use a lot of memes. It's a good way to summarize a really complex idea within just something easy, like a silly picture. Comparing things to familiar. So that's another just good educational trick is, can I take something that's unfamiliar and use a metaphor to compare it to something that's familiar to you to help you understand it? It's a model. All models are wrong, but some models are useful. Can I create a mental model for you that compares it to something that anchors it to something that's already in your mind? And then add relevance wherever you can. So in veterinary medicine, for me, that looks like lots of references to clinical medicine, at least as much of it as I know and remember, and lots of comparative relevance. So drawing on human medicine. People are familiar with human diseases that may not present in animals, but there is a lot of crossover and a lot of relevance there. And then we not only need to decorate our tunnel, make it fun and happy, we also need to check for obstacles. And this is something that's a little harder, I think, because it requires flipping your perspective and really looking at it from the learner's point of view. So imagine just kind of sitting in your classroom as if you were a student in that classroom and kind of looking around the room, checking for some of these obstacles. So in veterinary school, a lot of things on this list are unfortunately very common. It's inherently stressful. There's a lot of anxiety, whether that's test anxiety, social anxiety in my class, burnout, trying to impress my teachers. There's also occasionally, lack of relevance. Is this material important to me? Am I, being lectured on maybe PhD level material that's not really clinically relevant to me? That's going to cause me to disengage. It's going to be an obstacle to me choosing that tunnel. What about shame? If I, have a question in class and I don't feel safe to raise my hand, or maybe I do ask a question and someone, snickers at me, or the professor says, oh, that's a silly question. I'm going to feel shame, and that's going to block my learning. If I'm intimidated, if I'm afraid, if the expectations are unclear, that's going to cause me to hesitate. I'm not sure what's going on. Going back to the dog training metaphor, if my trainer is sometimes very responsive and receptive and happy with me, and other times very punishing and maybe angry, if there's any unpredictability there, if expectations are unclear, that's going to cause stress and fear in me, and it's going to prevent me from engaging fully in the environment. And then distractions. Is it loud outside the room? That's going to be an obstacle to them paying attention, obviously. Is it hot? Is the room ceiling dripping with water? But I digress. All right, so we're going to kind of change gears a little bit here and look at the second mashup, which I call removing obstacles. So this is a concept called the hidden curriculum. There's been a number of publications and books written about this. But the hidden curriculum really talks about these kind of unseen obstacles to learning that exist in the school environment. So I mentioned Brene Brown earlier. She's one of my favorite authors on this, or really any subject. This is one of my favorite books by her. It's called Dare to Lead, and in it she talks about these two different cultures. One is called being a knower and being right. So in this kind of culture, having the answers is rewarded. So that's what she calls being a knower. So if I ask you a question, it's like if I'm pimping you for an answer and you are the person that has all the answers, you're the one that's going to get the reward. So being right is what's rewarded. In contrast to that, she describes this other type of environment where being a learner is rewarded. So asking questions, asking good questions is where the meat is. Because when we ask good questions, we're not so much worried about being right. We're trying to get it right. We're trying to gain information and understand. Conversely, when we're being a knower, we're trying to project information. We're trying to project confidence, and I am right. I'm not worried about getting it right. I'm worried about being right, being correct. And so how does that translate in our classroom environment? Well, it's really important to create a safe container for learning. This is another quote by a researcher on psychological safety, which we're going to talk about it in a minute. Her name is Amy Edmondson. It's hard to be wrong in front of people. It's hard to ask questions. It's hard to look like you don't have the answer. So Amy Edmondson noticed this in educational environments, especially in medical education. And she coined this term called psychological safety, which is the belief that I'm not going to be punished or humiliated for speaking up, either with ideas or questions or concerns. I can bring up mistakes to the team, and the team is a safe environment for learning, for interpersonal risk-taking. So expressing curiosity is risky. You're opening yourself up. You're saying, hey, I don't know the answer to this, and that's showing vulnerability. So if we can create a safe container, this concept of psychological safety, if we can create that for our learners, then they're going to feel safe to speak up. And this is really going to free them up from that state of constant self-monitoring, that self-consciousness, that worrying about being a knower and projecting that I have the answers and I know the answers and I'm competent and correct. It's going to free all of their mind up and their consciousness up from that. And that's going to let them use their brain power to be engaged in the moment and concentrate on learning and concentrate on the task at hand. So if you're not familiar with this concept, these are some older articles now. There has been just an absolute deluge of literature on this, especially in medical education, less so in veterinary medical education, but I think the concepts are applicable. So I really encourage you to read up on that if this is a new concept to you. I think it is hugely, hugely important in education. And here is why. The higher performance field you're in, the higher the performance standards are, the more important it is to feel this sense of psychological safety. So I'd like you to kind of look at this chart with me for a second. And I'd like you to start down here on the x-axis with performance standards. So we can think of this as the gas. How much gas is being applied in the environment? Or do we have students who are apathetic? They're not really challenged. Or do we have students all the way on the other end who are really anxious because the performance standards are really, really high? So performance standards in veterinary medicine obviously were on the high side. So what can we do to get out of this anxiety zone where performance standards are really high? Well, let's look at this y-axis over here. So the y-axis is psychological safety, or that safe container. I feel safe to learn. So this is kind of like the brakes. When psychological safety is not present, the brakes are on. When psychological safety is present, the brakes are off. So when the brakes are on, people feel apathetic. I'm not motivated. I'm not excited. I'm much more interested in protecting myself. All of my effort and energy are inside, and they're worried about, how do I look? How am I being perceived in the world? If we increase psychological safety, we take off those brakes to learning, and people are comfortable. They're open now. They're collegial. They feel safe. So the ideal place to be here is in this upper quadrant, this learning zone, where performance standards are high, people feel challenged. However, they also feel safe to learn and collaborate and question and make mistakes. So they're going to develop. They're not going to be down here in this anxiety zone, because we're applying the gas, but we're also removing the brakes. So what does that look like in education? Well, classrooms without psychological safety, students end up feeling judged. Because of that, they often withhold questions. They don't ask to get their needs met. They might not even know what their needs are, because they don't feel it's important for them to express those needs. Their learning is going to be restricted to what the educator or the institution thinks is important. And that's a really key thing. Without psychological safety, we're aiming for performance and pleasing. I'm going to learn what makes my professor happy, because I don't want to be shamed by my professor. So it's less, what do I think is important to learn? It's more, what is the educator? How can I make the trainer or the teacher happy? There's a lot of anxiety and fear and potentially shame in this environment. People don't feel safe to speak up. They're worried about being judged. So they create this kind of role self that's very focused on image management, presenting this image of competence. And it really fosters competition. Everyone's kind of out for themselves. I'm worried that, my question was a better question than my classmate's question, because that makes me look better. So it really fosters this environment, again, of being a knower and being right, and rewarding knowing and being correct and performing, which, as you can see, has all these detrimental effects. Conversely, if we add psychological safety to the environment, students can feel our empathy. They feel that they're understood and supported. It removes that need to do all this image management and role self-creation. It removes the anxiety. And now we have students that can increase their focus on learning, because they're not doing all this self-monitoring and worrying about what other people are thinking of them. Here again is that key component. This now moves us from restricted learning of what the institution or the teacher is telling me is important, to more self-directed learning. I feel free and curious. My curiosity is freed up, and now I can learn and focus on what I think is important. So this is really, really, really key, especially in our veterinary medical environment, where we're not teaching you guys everything. You need to pick up topics outside of what we're teaching in class, things like professionalism, how to be a vet in a world of other vets, how to engage with other professionals, things like career, mental health, residency, all these other things that we don't teach you. You have to have some self-engaged and self-directed learning. Psychological safety is going to just increase engagement overall in the environment. And importantly, it's going to lead to people being their more authentic selves. I'm not worried about, managing my image. I'm worried about what I'm learning, and my curiosity and my inner state. So this is going to lead to an environment that's much more collaborative. When we're focused on being a learner, asking questions bring people together. Pimping and, I have the answer and you don't, divides people and invites competition. But asking questions and focusing on questions and focusing on, let's get it right. Everyone's view is important, and everyone has a valuable perspective here. Let's ask questions and work together as a group until we get it right. So we want to think about not just in education, but these people who we're educating as veterinary students in a very short time are going to go out into practice and be practicing veterinarians. What does medical practice look like without psychological safety? There's been a ton of research on this in the human medical field. You think about these students who are worried about projecting competency. That doesn't stop when you graduate. It follows you, and you develop this kind of chronic imposter syndrome of, they only think I'm good at my job because I knew the answer to that question. I don't really feel like I know anything. And then you're afraid to speak up about that because speaking up isn't vulnerable. It might invite shame and judgment. Another thing that is kind of swept under the rug is medical errors. In this environment that's not psychologically safe, how likely do you think someone is to admit they've made a medical error once they realize it? If they realize it, not likely. So without psychological safety, environments that have low psych safety scores have increased rate of medical errors, which is actually quite scary and of critical importance. You're not going to be feeling connected to your team, but sort of this competition aspect, and you're going to be burnt out because of all this anxiety, fear, and withholding your needs. In practices that have high psychological safety scores, this is what we see. The focus is not on projecting competency, it's on actually being competent and achieving competency. So this removes imposter syndrome by making people actually competent, by bolstering their feelings of competency, by giving them training where they need, because you're allowing them to ask for help. You're allowing them to come to you and say, hey, I don't feel strong in this area. I would really like to get better at surgery. And then your boss would say, all right, well, let's have you, do some more surgeries. I'll mentor you. So instead of projecting, I'm good at surgery, here I can actually become good at surgery. This increases patient safety because it's reducing the rate of medical errors. If I create an error, it happens all the time. Everybody messes up. But if my environment is safe, I can bring that to my boss, to the team, to whoever needs to know, and we can examine that event and say, hey, is this, does this represent a systemic problem? Do we need a new SOP, a new way of doing things? Was this just a one-off? So as a team, we then improve the environment and get better. So this creates a spirit of teamwork, collaboration. Empathy is really strong in these environments because everyone feels heard. I feel like I can speak my needs and they will be listened to and met with care and kindness. And so places that have high psychological safety have much more career satisfaction, higher retention of employees, lower turnover. So this is not just a thing that we need to worry about in education. This is something that we take with us into practice. So this is another one of my favorite quotes. This one is actually posted on my office door because it's so good. Attention, deep listening. People are dying in spirit for lack of it. In academic culture, most listening is critical listening. We tend to pay attention only long enough to develop a counter argument. We critique the students' or the colleagues' ideas. We mentally grade and pigeonhole each other. In society at large, people often listen with an agenda to sell or petition or seduce. Seldom is there a deep, open-hearted, non-judgmental reception of the other. And so we all talk louder and more stridently and with a terrible desperation. By contrast, if someone truly listens to me, my spirit begins to expand. In order to create a safe container for students, we need to practice this deep listening because that's really going to be what enables this. If you look in here, just some of these words, developing a counter argument, critique, grade, pigeonhole, agenda, petition. That's all culture of knowing we're after something, right? We have an agenda. We want you to learn the answer. I think it's much more important to develop that culture where we really listen to students and say, hey, what questions do you have? What are you struggling with right now? What's important for you to learn? And so I know a lot of you probably are students, but you can create safety for everyone who has less power than you. So second years, you can create psychological safety for first years. Fourth years, you can create it for the third and second years. I can create it for the students under me. My bosses can create it for me. So really, you create the environment. So think of where we started of who I am is how I lead. What you bring to the environment is important. So I really view teaching as an educational alliance. So that's the dog training model where we're partners in this education. I want you to succeed as much as you want to succeed. We're partners. We're going to get there together. As educators, we can also model a lot of these attitudes and values that we prize in students. So things like thinking out loud. when I don't know the answer, I say something like, I'm not sure, but let me think about it. And I kind of talk through the steps, or I sometimes will Google things in front of students. I'll say, that's a great question for PubMed. I don't have the answer, but maybe science does. So just kind of showing your thinking process and demonstrating that, I'm not a knower. I'm a learner. I'm always learning. I'm curious too. And if you ask a question that I don't have the answer to, I'm going to go find it and I'm going to show you how I find it, right? I don't expect you to have all the answers because I don't have all the answers. And then kind of along with that, destigmatizing failure. So not knowing the answer to something is not failure. It's an opportunity for growth. I've had this conversation with a couple residents, and the first time I had this conversation was with myself as a resident. For my first, couple months, 6 months of residency, I just felt so dumb all the time. It was like you're learning so much that you just feel like, man, I don't know anything. And I just had this moment where it clicked inside my head. It was like, hey, every time you feel stupid, it's not that you're stupid, it's that you have filled a gap in your knowledge. So every time you feel that feeling of, oh my God, I'm so dumb, what's really happening is that means I've just learned something new and I've gotten less dumb. So really thinking of it not as failure to not know something, but these are growth opportunities. The more I admit I don't know, the more I am able to learn. I put a question around this because I don't know if the data is fully in on this yet, but there have been some studies that show an inverse relationship between psychological safety and assessments. So in the human medical world right now, a lot of people are looking at, should medical education be all basically pass-fail? Should we reduce the number of exams and quizzes and just overt assessments to increase psychological safety? So I think that's an open question. Right now, I think a lot of veterinary schools are kind of experimenting with this right now, especially in clinical year, which I think makes a lot of sense. But that's kind of an open question right now. And then another thing we can do to shift this from an environment of knowing to environment of learning is we can be better at encouraging and rewarding questions. As professors, we're really good at rewarding answers like, oh, you had the answer, you're so smart, everybody applaud, good job. We really need to get better at rewarding questions, and people who show vulnerability in those moments by saying, hey, I don't have the answer to this, but I'm really curious and I'm willing to be vulnerable and expose my curiosity at the risk of being mocked and have someone say, hey, that's a stupid question. So it's really important to acknowledge and praise and provide that, going back to dog training, that positive reinforcement piece of, wow, that was a really insightful question. That's such a good question that I don't even know the answer. Let's see if someone's done a PhD on your question. And if that doesn't prove the answer, I encourage them. You should do a PhD on that question. You are very good at coming up with questions, and that is the heart of science. Invite input and participation. Remember the whole concept of choice. Your learner has a choice. So here I'm inviting you, hey, you have a choice. You don't have to participate, but I would like you to participate. What do you think? And kind of, entice them in. And then acknowledging learner emotion. So there are days when I look out into my classroom and everyone is just, you can see in their eyes, they are just not in the room with me. And I'm like, oh, do we have exams this week? Are you guys look extra stressed out. So just acknowledging that that's in the room can help them and kind of let them like, oh, okay, yeah, they see I'm anxious. I don't have to, perform for my professor that I'm here and paying attention when I'm really having a hard day. So even that can help with safety. And so we're going to end by another quote. This is actually a quote from you guys. I hear this all the time. And this for me is actually a green flag. When I hear you guys saying, this might be a stupid question, but, and then you ask your question, I feel relieved. I feel that, all right, I now have a classroom where these students feel safe, because what they're saying is, I feel really unsure of myself. I'm anxious to even ask this. I'm worried it's stupid and you're going to make fun of me. But they ask the question anyway. So they feel safe enough not only to ask the question, but to admit, hey, I'm kind of nervous to ask this question because I'm not how you're going to respond to me. So that to me is like, it's the best green flag. It's when I get from you guys, okay, I'm starting to feel kind of safe and open up in the environment. But you guys have hopefully heard me say this before. If not, I'm going to say it again. There is no such thing as a stupid question. All questions are great questions. So please ask all the stupid questions. You can give me the green flag and start with this might be a stupid question, but I'm going to tell you it's not a stupid question. There's no such thing. We want to create an environment of learning where questions are rewarded. So ask all the questions all the time. It's how you learn. All right, well, that is the end of our second episode. I would like to leave you guys with a couple references. I know I mentioned Dare to Lead. It's a just really, really excellent book for anyone, especially in leadership positions, but I think it's just a really good book for anyone who interacts with people, interacts on teams. This other one here on the left is a newer one I picked up that is just absolutely fantastic. It's called Equity-Centered Trauma-Informed Education. Just to kind of give you the TLDR on this book, it's mainly for early educators, so more of like elementary school, grade school, high school, stuff like that. But the principles in here are very applicable to all education. And the focus of this book is how can we kind of change our lens and look at our classroom environment through the lens of this kind of trauma-informed base. If we can create a space in our classroom that is safe for students who have been affected by trauma, what's going to happen is that's going to elevate the environment for all students, and it's going to make it easier to learn for every student. So this was just a really good book. It really challenged me a lot to kind of look at some of these hidden curriculum things, these things that are not really visible but definitely affect the learning atmosphere in the classroom. So check these out. They're both really great. And again, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, comments, other resources you'd like to share, I would love to hear from you. Also, if you have any ideas for future episodes, please leave a comment. Join us on the Discord server. Thanks for joining us. Be well.